Yo, check out my website, www.theclownthompson.net. That's clown spelled with K as you see here. As you see, here are my rants here. I'll be more and more regular in posting rants in the future. You see what I have going on here. Also, you can also get your merch here at www.cafepress.com. Search for the Clown Time Sports. You see here I have sweatshirts, hoodies, baby gear, mugs, t-shirts. So just come on over and grab yourself some merch.
Welcome to tonight's. It's been a long time since you heard from me podcast episode of the Klown Out Podcast. I'm Scott Burks. Please continue to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Even if you do not agree with what either I or my guests have to say tonight, which may be the case, maybe not. But anyway, just comment anyway. Let's have some fun with it, because in any event, you'll be glad you did, and I'll be glad you did. Okay, so you see these two gentlemen here, so you know it's ACC football is on the agenda, so we're going to get right to it. My friends from the All Sports Discussion ACC Sports Blog, you guys know who they are by now, Jeff Fan and Matthew Warner. Gentlemen, how's it going?
Doing good this evening. Thanks for having us, Scott.
You got it.
Doing great. Thank you.
You got it. And speaking of doing great, let's get to football right quick. Florida State, for those of you, in case people who forgot, because I hadn't podcasted for a while, I grew, even though I'm an NC State alum, I grew up a Florida State football fan because my mother's family's from Tallahassee. We used to see, like, my great grandmother lived on a hill where you could literally see Florida State's campus when the leaves would fall. And also, like, my father, when he was a runner, he used to run around at Florida State's track. My brother and I would be with him until we were kids. We've been in love with Florida State since. So that's pretty much explains, for those you don't know, my Florida State affinity in football. That's how I got started with college sports and football. But anything else, I'm unfortunately a state grad and a state fan, and it tears at my heart in many ways. But not exactly. We'll get to that in a moment. But nevertheless, Florida State's still unbeaten. Florida State's in the catbird seat, if you will, for the college football playoff, because you've seen the rankings that came out last night. They have Florida State in the 4-hole, which I don't have a problem with, because, you know, they don't have the resume that the Georgia, Ohio State, even though that's debatable. Actually, that's debatable. In Michigan, it's like, come on, they're a good team, but they haven't played it yet, except for Penn State, which they handled Penn State, so they earned a spot too. But I always say, guys, that this is early in the process, because more likely than not, everything will work itself out in the end. However, I noticed that Louisville is at number 9, which is a good spot. Number 10. I'm sorry, number 10, which is a decent spot to be in, given their resume. You know, the biggest win being Notre Dame. I look at the other teams in front of them. I'm like, really? He's still going to stick them in the 10-hole? But nevertheless, it's still shaping up for, if Louisville were to win out and Florida State were to, obviously they're going to beat Northern Alabama. I mean, come on. But if they beat Florida on the road following week, which they should set up for a very interesting ACC championship game. But it's going to, the ACC championship game could get muddled. More of that number. But nevertheless, Jeff, I ask you this. Albeit it's still early in the process, do you have any qualms with the college football playoff rankings in week 2 of it, if you will?
No, I mean, I think, having Georgia number 1, finally they after 2 months they got started, the real part of their schedule, where they, started playing some decent teams, and I mean, I think we can, admit they look pretty good. I mean, they struggled with Missouri, but Missouri's turned out to be pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah.
They're pretty good.
Agree.
And then they took apart Ole Miss. They got Tennessee this week. And then they'll have the SEC championship. I'm not forgetting about Georgia Tech, but Let's not kid ourselves. Georgia Tech's just not equipped to really compete with Georgia right now.
Sure.
So I have no problem with Georgia at 1. I think after that, like you kind of talked about at the beginning, I know they've got Ohio State at 2, and they put them up there because they gave them a lot of credit for that Notre Dame win. But I mean, Louisville's beat them, Clemson beat them.
Right.
Let's not act like that win is all that great. And Penn State, the win over Penn State, if you're a top 10 team, who doesn't beat Penn State? That's just I mean, every year they're going to lose to Ohio State and Michigan.
Right.
So,
Right.
let's not get carried away with that win, especially with Michigan, who they went, a good 9 weeks here, prepping for Penn State, with that atrocious schedule they played. And,
Yeah.
we saw in that game, yeah, they handle their business. There's no question about that. But I mean, when you have 2 months to prepare for a game, I would expect you to win.
Right. Right.
So, and then you have Florida State at 4, and Washington at 5. I think you could interchange Washington. I think if you wanted to go by resume, you could have Washington up there at 2 or 3.
I
But
agree with that.
yeah, but what I like about it is that they've made it clear that these are the 5 best teams, and I don't see a scenario where if 4 of them are undefeated, you won't have 4 undefeated teams. I've seen a couple things out there that said, "Oh, should Florida State, be concerned if they're undefeated, with a 1-loss Michigan or Ohio State team?" And that just is absurd to me. I don't even understand.
Yeah.
I don't even know how that can be a discussion,
Right.
or start getting into a discussion of if it comes down to 1-loss teams between Texas and Alabama. I mean, to me, that's just insane.
Yeah.
That
Texas beat Alabama.
Texas beat Alabama and handily beat them in
Yeah.
Tuscaloosa.
Correct.
And if we're not gonna, if all things are equal and we're not going to, take head to head into account, then what are we doing here? I mean,
Mhm.
I don't care if Alabama has looked good in the last few weeks because they beat LSU in kind of a rout. Yeah, so did Florida State.
Right. Right.
it is. Let's not act like that Alabama has just taken down the best teams in the country left and right. And even if they beat Georgia, if it's between Texas and Alabama somehow, I don't see how you can take Alabama over Texas. You lost on your home field by double digits,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But right now, I don't see a scenario where Ohio State Michigan loser stays in the field. So the way it sets up now, if you win, you take care of business, you're going to be in the playoffs.
Right. Exactly. That's why, like I said, and plus Ohio State, to your point, Ohio State and Michigan will have to play each other. So that's
Yeah,
going to cancel. That's going to cancel it out. And to your point, the winner of that game, along with Georgia, Florida State, and Washington, they all stay unbeaten and went out. Those are your top 4 teams.
yeah. I mean, you cannot convince me in any way that the loser of that game should remain in the top 4 over any of the other undefeated
Right.
teams. There's just
Right.
no way you can convince me. If Michigan loses that game, they would have gone the entire season playing one team with a pulse that they beat by 9 points.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can't argue Michigan in, and if Ohio State loses that game, you're looking at a resume that's it's better than Michigan's,
Right.
but you can't justify them getting into the playoff with a close win over Penn State and a
Mhm.
3-point win over a Notre Dame team that lost to the best teams that played on their schedule.
Right.
The 3 best teams Notre Dame played, uh,
Mhm.
Louisville,
Yep.
Ohio State.
Yep.
Oh, well, actually, I mean, you might can argue that Clemson may or may not have been the 3rd best team, but they lost to them.
I think they might be. I
They
think they
they
might be the
they
3rd
might
best
be
team
actually if
because
it comes
look
up.
who they play. Look who's I'm gonna go to their schedule right quick. Notre Dame has played NC State, Central Michigan, Tennessee State. They should have lost to Duke.
Yeah, they should have lost
Navy
to Duke.
and Pitt. They crushed Pitt, and they got Wake Forest, and they're at Stanford to close the season. So yes, those three teams they lost to are arguably the three best teams in their schedule.
Yeah, so you can't convince me. You're not going to put Ohio State into the playoff if they lose to Michigan on the basis of beating Notre Dame and Penn State. I'm sorry,
No, you can't do that.
You just can't. So take care of business. You're going to be in.
Right. That's called like intellectual malpractice if you assume that. How about you, Matthew? What are your thoughts on the college football playoff?
I don't have a lot to add to what Jeff said. He covered it pretty well, but I would actually go a step farther and say that if Washington is undefeated at the end of the season, they should be the number one seed because nobody has played the resume that Washington has had all year. They have gone through a Game of Thrones November so far, and they've done pretty well. They've arguably done very well. I mean, I think they have an extreme trap game coming up in Corvallis. There's all kinds of bad things that happen in that town, especially when you're playing a team that's probably upset that they got passed over in conference alignment. They're playing coincidentally, they're playing two teams directly in a row, right? Well, Oregon State this week and Wazoo next week.
Right.
And you know, both those teams are going to want a piece of Washington. But if Washington gets through there, they're going to be undefeated. And you know, we'll find out whether they can win the Pac-12 championship game or not.
Right.
But they should be, if they get through, they should be the number one seed. And I want to go a step further in criticality here than Jeff did on Michigan. I would argue that Michigan only plays a team with an offensive pulse 1 week a year. Right?
That is true.
With an offensive pulse, because Penn State, I've said for weeks, has no offense. And they just fired, and from what I understand, they just fired their offensive coordinator, right?
That's a great point. That's a great point.
And so they you know, I look forward to I look forward to them actually playing a team, you know, that has a decent offense. We'll find out more about that. But if any of these teams are ahead, if Washington is undefeated and any of these other teams are ahead of Washington with the schedule that they played, we have a serious problem because the Pac-12 has had, quite frankly, the best year as a conference that I can remember, perhaps in a generation.
It's been by far the best league this year. It's really the Pac-12 and everybody else. We used to say that about the SEC. I mean, because if you look at the Pac-12, dude, you got Washington, who's in the college football playoff ranking. You have Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Oregon State, SC for a little while. Well, SC obviously, but Washington State was ranked for a little while. That's 6 teams, and UCLA too. That's 7. 7 squads. That's a gauntlet out of 12. That's a damn gauntlet. So because if you look at Georgia, its schedule, I mean, it's not even close. It's not even close. But I will say this, and I think this is BS what they're doing in Washington, but I think I know why they're being penalized. Look at the games. Speaking of Arizona, look at the games against Arizona, Stanford, and especially Arizona State at home, where they barely beat Arizona State at home, right? I think they're holding that and the Stanford win, where they eked out a win, and the Arizona win as well. I think, well, particularly the Arizona State and Stanford game, they're holding that against Washington, and I think that's not right. I think that's BS. A win is a win, and I think that people, when you have like rankings from people, that it tends to be subjective anyway, which is why I always said, just go back to the computer model. At least the computer model took out the bias. It took out the subjectivity. It just it factored the rankings in addition to the other rankings. It factored in strength of schedule, right? So that alone, and I don't have the RPI or Sacred ratings in front of me, but I'm pretty sure Washington's much higher than 5th in those ratings because they take into account the strength of schedule. So to me, to Matthew's point, The fact that Washington's not ranked number 1 is criminal. It's totally criminal. If you base that on Jeff, if you base that on strength of schedule, if strength of schedule is like the people in the room led by Boo Kerrigan at AC State AD, if they say strength of schedule, why the hell isn't Washington number 1? I don't understand that.
I don't know. There seems to be this love affair with Ohio State and Michigan. I mean, if Georgia runs the table, includes a win over Alabama in the SEC title game, I mean, I'll listen to an argument with their resume. But I mean, if you're going by pure resume, Washington should be no worse than number 2 if at the end of the season they run the table. And right now they're and I think it'll start to sort itself out. It seems to be that if Washington goes to Corvallis and beats Oregon State, a lot of people think that they'll jump ahead of Florida State into that 4th position. But I mean, like we said, as long as we don't see the loser of the Michigan Ohio State game in the mix, if that happens, if they're still in the mix, the loser of that game, there should be an absolute investigation. Because we know that the winner of that game, is going to have a layup in the Big Ten title game against, an Iowa team that can't even cross midfield half the time. So
fire their offensive coordinator too, but go ahead.
Yeah, fire their offensive coordinator. I think are they gonna? Is he fired? Or are they gonna be at the end of the season? But I mean, we all know about Iowa and that Michigan or Ohio State's gonna win that game by a bazillion. So they should get no credit for that game. Where at least Florida State, for example, is going to get at the very least a 9-win. Even if Louisville were to lose its last 2 games, I guess I could open up to. We're not quite all the way there with Louisville in the ACC title game, but my expectation is that they will meet at least a 10-win Louisville team, because I think they're winning at least one of their last 2. But I mean, the bottom line is, if we see a Michigan or Ohio State in the 4-team playoff with any debate with the other 4 undefeated teams, should be an investigation.
I agree with that. And before we talk about the ACC title game, the prospects of it, I'm gonna give a quick shout out to our sponsors, because there's some I want to bring up with y'all right quick. But anyway, BetUs.com. So let's sports better. Your favorite sports book. BetUs.com is back for our 30th year of NFL action. So with the industry's biggest sign-up bonus up to 200%, BetUs offers our members the opportunity to cash in for all your favorite sports, including NFL, UFC, and MLB. And if you're looking for live in-game betting, incredible odds with daily odds, boosts, props, and parlays, got it. And how about fast pass and exceptional one-on-one customer service? We got that too. So long as to betus.com or call 800-792-3887. That's 800-79-BET-US. You use the promo code TKT for the Klown Times as well. BetUS.com, where the game begins. All right, remember that crazy that ACC championship game scenario you mentioned earlier? Well, tease it, Jeff. Louisville, even though we may believe they're pretty much on their way there, especially if they take care of business at Miami, there's a chance. Matthew, you're going to like this. There's a chance that Virginia Tech could get there. There's also a chance that UNC could get there. If Louisville loses to Miami, and if Virginia Tech and Carolina win out, it gets really, really crazy, because the tiebreakers, I think, go by common opponents and strength of victory, right? So Joe Ovius, shout out to Joe Ovius and Joe Giglio of Ovius, the OG podcast on YouTube. You should check them out. Joe Giglio, I should say, mispronounced his last name. Sorry about that. He had a yellow sheet, and I wish I had it in front of me, of the scenarios where if Louisville, Virginia Tech, and UNC would have finished tied at 6-2 in the conference, how they shape out. They have there's some scenarios where if Carolina will have the better strip of victory over Louisville and Virginia Tech, but rather Virginia Tech as well would have a better shot of actually finding their way to the championship game, because I don't think Carolina's winning Clemson. I also don't think Carolina's winning at NC State. But so basically, like Clemson, they have I think who do they have left this week? I forgot, it escapes me, but because have they finished their conference play?
You say Clemson or?
I meant to say Virginia Tech. I'm sorry, Virginia Tech. Thinking about Clemson. I'm sorry.
Virginia Tech plays NC State on Saturday.
Right.
And
Virginia.
Surprisingly, I like Virginia Tech in that game, Scott, because Brennan Armstrong's coming to Blacksburg, and the good things don't happen to Brennan Armstrong when he comes to Blacksburg. So I feel pretty. I know it's going to be a tough game, but I actually do like Virginia Tech in that game because I think we have the better quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
And then Virginia Tech goes on the road to Virginia, and so those are the final two games. And I will always pick. Even though Jeff says Virginia's been really close every time. They have too this year. They've been very competitive in a lot of games, and they even beat North Carolina.
Right.
I'll take Virginia. I'll take Virginia Tech to beat Virginia every time until it doesn't. And I've been more often than I've been right than not in the past 2 decades.
Right.
I do feel like, I'll just say this briefly about Virginia Tech. I mean, they're going to may end up 2 games better, possibly, than I thought they were at the beginning of the season. They weren't necessarily if it does happen, it wouldn't necessarily be the 7 wins that I thought it would be. I mean, they met my expectations because I picked Virginia Tech to be 5-7. So if they go above it, good for them. It means that they found their quarterback. And I wonder what would happen if he would have started the entire season.
Right. It just goes to show you, sometimes there's some things about loyalty that I always say loyalty can do 1 or 2 things. It can reward you pretty well, or it can get your ass fired. And, and for them not to realize, Coach Bly not to realize that he had that he started the wrong quarterback the first 2 weeks of the season, 2-3 weeks of the season, and look where they're at now. Virginia Tech has a realistic chance of finishing 6-2 in the ACC. Who could have saw that coming this season, right? And that's good news for the Hokie fans. But still, you have to wonder for the out-of-conference schedule, what if they started the right QB earlier instead of letting loyalty take over? Because I know, Matthew, that Coach Pry saw with his own 2 eyes that he was starting the wrong quarterback the first 2-3 weeks of the season. I know he had to know that. He had to know that, right?
I think he's coming around to it because I think he's probably learned from lessons past, obviously, with Hendon Hooker.
Yeah.
He wasn't here when that happened.
Yeah, he wasn't here. That was all.
But I think, Jeff has said this before, certainly certainly drones, I call it drones attack, right? He's a runner, and he gives a different dimension to the offense that you haven't seen. You certainly didn't see last year,
right? And
things certainly change. So I think that I'm sure that they both see it now, and that we obviously look forward to next year. So there are some certain positive things to look ahead to. Not to say that NC State isn't going to be a tough opponent. NC State has a tough defense, and what you're getting from NC State on their defense. Charlie Miles is there from Virginia Tech. Yeah. I know I'm going to get a defensive line that's going to attack you on every play.
Right.
So I know what I'm getting from NC State. I just don't know what I'm getting from NC State on offense.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Well, first of all, what year is Drones? What's his classification?
He, I believe, is a redshirt sophomore here. Okay. I think he has a couple of years left.
Right.
So he's
Okay,
going to be
he'll
sitting
be
in
around.
they're going to be sitting in pretty good shape with him
Yeah.
for, with him for a while.
I agree.
And, he's more decisive. You know what I mean? That he's just
Yeah.
more decisive than Willis was. You feel more confident that he's going to make the right play. And, he reminds me a lot. I don't want to say Tyrod because he's not quite not quite as good as Tyrod Taylor.
Sure, of course not.
But he's in that same sort of vein. Like, you're going to get somebody who's going to be give you some plays when you need it with his feet. He's going to find the receiver. He's got a good arm.
Right.
Pretty reliable. He's learned a lot, through this first year through this first year of starting, and next year you kind of see like a lot of things that things that perhaps will all come together. I mean, the big thing I've noticed about Virginia Tech is that there are more playmakers on the offensive side of the ball than we had last year, right? Virginia Tech, didn't have a stable of receivers like they have now.
Right.
They did, and so they didn't have a running back like they had now that feels like who's already getting pro scout looks.
Right.
It's kind of reminded me of that Khalil Herbert, a little bit, getting those types of looks from the NFL. So, they certainly did a good job recruiting in the portal, getting off offensive skill talent. Need to shore up the lines a little bit, but there's if you find me a more committed fan base, I have yet to find one, because they're still selling out every one of the games, Scott and Jeff, and the team's barely 500. So
great fan base. I mean, you got to wonder though, they would have loved to have that Purdue game back, right? They would have loved to have
I think so. I think so, and I think probably the Marshall game like that, and you think at times, like, this is why I think, I go back and I think, I've asked Jeff this before, like, if he's starting day one, and I'm talking about our QB, if he's starting day one against ODU, he's getting all those snaps in the fall, in August, they probably beat Purdue.
Yeah.
They probably beat Marshall.
Yeah.
Might be too much to ask him to win at Rutgers on the road, but maybe after 3 games, Rutgers is very offensively challenged. Maybe there's an opportunity to win there too, because you're getting these extra snaps. But, you chalk it up and you think, you're going to be better on the offensive line side of the ball next year. You chalk it up and that, there's a lot more players who are going to be in that system for Virginia Tech next year.
Right.
And we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, perhaps a couple more wins, I didn't expect Virginia Tech to win at Louisville.
Right.
So I did,
no one did.
right. I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech was very competitive for 3 quarters against Florida State.
Right.
And so
they crushed BC though.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, crushed BC.
A lot of people didn't really expect.
They've been playing well too. Ball Scouts been playing well too. So that's a great win for the Hokies. So I mean, I think I have a good future next year. But one more thing about college football right quick before we transition for a little bit of college basketball to close the show. Jeff, I remember you lamenting or talking about like the poll, like this college football playoff rankings and everything, how they set everything up. I despise the Tar Heels. Y'all both. But what if the Tar Heels didn't crap the bed, right, against both Virginia and Georgia Tech, with a blew double-digit leads in both games late in the game? They'd be sitting at 10-0 right now. They would more likely be ranked no lower than Oregon, which means they'll probably be 6th in the college football playoff rank instead of 20th. And that would have set up a tantalizing scenario for the conference, right? Because you'd have 2 undefeated squads and a 1-loss team in the top 10. That would have been, I don't know if that would have made Paul Feinbaum's head explode, but the prospect of the ACC faring better at the top than the SEC. But the point is, it would have been, not that to say the possibility still is not there for a tantalizing ACC championship game, but it would have been much more compelling to have not one not one, but two undefeated teams, and the third one-loss team in the top 10 in the college football playoff rankings. That would have been a great conversation point, talking point for ACC football.
Yeah, I mean, the ACC was really that close to having kind of an epic finish to their season, and I mean, we could still get a quite a compelling ACC championship if Louisville can win its final two games, because I mean that at 11-1, they're probably going to be on the fringes of the playoff discussion, even though I think it's going to take just a bit too much to really get them in there. That pit loss is pretty.
That screwed them. That screwed them.
That's pretty ugly.
That totally screwed them. Yeah.
But they would at least be able to, be in the discussion a little bit. But like you said, North Carolina, yeah, I mean, you get Virginia at home, who were winless at the time in the ACC, and then you lose that game. And you said that they blew the double-digit lead with Georgia Tech in the fourth quarter, and that's exactly right. But they actually had 4 double-digit leads in that game at various points in the game, and they couldn't put Georgia Tech away in that one. And we saw what against Duke playing their. I think Loftus was definitely no better than their second, but he might have been their third string quarterback. And I mean, he looked like Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes back there.
Yeah, that defense is awful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's statistically worse defenses in the ACC, but I'm not sure there's a worse coached one, because you just look at some of the things North Carolina does, and it's not that they don't have athletes on defense. They've got some athletes, but they'll show replays of it, and they'll show a linebacker taking like this terrible angle. And I know in that Duke game, there were like 2 touchdowns where they basically just bounced outside because the linebacker or the defensive back just took the wrong angle. And I mean, you'll see that over and over in these North Carolina games. I mean, their defense is getting worse as the season progresses.
Right.
So it's going to be really interesting to see how they perform in the last couple of games of the season against 2 offenses in Clemson and NC State that don't exactly light it up here. I mean, that's going to be real interesting. But I mean, because the offensive side of the ball, they're so talented. I mean, Drake May and Tez Walker.
Yes.
I mean,
the running backs.
The running backs. I mean, that's an NFL offense they have. And if I'm North Carolina, even at 8-2 and ranked 20th, I'm still kind of feeling like you let things get away with potential for so much more on the season.
This is a waste of season for Carolina. I'm gonna come out and say it. It's a waste of season because you have Drake May. This is where Drake May is likely last year. He's gonna probably go first or second in the NFL draft in 2024. You have Tez Walker, that stable running backs. They have a decent offensive line. They wasted it. It was all out in front of them, and they wasted it with those 2 head-scratching losses, and they almost blew it against Duke. Against Duke's third-string quarterback. What are we doing here? G. Chiswick, what are you doing, dude? What are you doing? So
yeah, I mean, I think at the very least, at the end of the season, they got to move on from Chiswick, because that quarterback from Duke, that wasn't Riley Leonard. They made him look like Patrick Mahomes back there. I was like, my goodness, he was just, he was just throwing it all over Chapel Hill that night, and they very nearly knocked off North Carolina.
Yeah, I know, they should have beaten them. And by the way, they blew a lead in that game. So almost blew a lead in that game. So anyway, it is what it is. But we'll put a nice red bow on this podcast. Talk a little basketball here. Not a lot, because it's still football season. We want to give football the proper respect. But, it's early going in college basketball. We saw Duke take care of business against Michigan State, who's also offensively challenged. They can't even shoot from a broad side of the barn, hit the broad side of the barn. But they also lost to Arizona, which I think is a great team. Shout out to Caleb Love. And, may not have done that on purpose. But anyway, you have also Miami playing well basketball-wise. They're still well coached by Larinaga. and Carolina's doing their thing, unfortunately. But one game that really caught my eye. It's on the women's side.
Yeah.
And you know where I'm going with this. My beloved Wolfpack, the women, got their big time revenge on not only UConn, but the damn NCAA for in the Elite Eight, having the UConn play at a neutral site that was, guess where? In Hartford, Connecticut. For the right to go to the Final Four when AC State was the top seeded team in their bracket and UConn was the second seeded team. How did they let that happen? Actually, I know how to let that happen. I mean, I could go on about how the NCAA loves UConn and the tournament anyway, but that's another story for the time. So their win, State's win over UConn, an 11-point win, where Miss Anaya Rivers scored 33 points, lit UConn up. That was a big middle finger. The bigger middle finger went to the NCAA for like, we know what y'all did a couple years ago. We know what you did when you gave us a neutral site in Connecticut to play UConn for the right to go to the Final Four. Yeah, that was fair. But anyway, that's not here nor there. That got us in the top 25, not only top 25, but we're ranked 14th right now. We got a big blowout win tonight over Elon. So at least they're winning when I last checked. So shout out to the NC State women's basketball program for that big win over UConn. That has to be cheesy from ear to ear, as you can tell. I'm excited about this season. Again, this is supposed to be a rebuilding year of sorts in Raleigh. So for us to knock off the big bullies in the block like that by double digits, yeah, we're still thinking about 2 years ago that seeding at a neutral site in Connecticut to play the UConn Huskies. So, Jeff, Matthew, I just want to get off my chest because I'm still pissed about that. I'm still have nightmares about that. We still went to overtime against those young ladies at UConn. We still could have won that game. We would have had a better shot if it was away from a neutral site in Connecticut. But that's not here.
I mean, that was just an unbelievable win. I mean, and that wasn't a UConn. That was a healthy UConn team. I mean, that was Paige Buchers was back in that game.
And had a good game too. She had
a good game. So yeah, that was an all-timer win there. And I heard the environment was just unbelievable. And Reynolds, yeah,
it was raucous. It was raucous environment. I think the men, whoever runs the men's side of things, they should take notes. I think they kind of wish they stayed at Reynolds because it's more of an intimate environment. And from having been a student there, obviously before the PNC Arena came along, they had all the games at Reynolds Coliseum as well. Even during the lean years in the 90s when I was there, it was still a crazy environment. It was still especially they play on national television. It was still a crazy environment. So I'm glad people support the women, continue to support the women in that arena, but the men should take notes. So I'm still happy. I'm so freaking happy. I'm excited. So I just want to get off that off my chest before I close the show. Anyway, Jeff and Matthew, where can people find you? I know I asked you this a lot, but just in case, where can people find you guys online and find your great website as well?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or X, whatever they're calling it, at Talkin' ACC Sports. That's TALKIN ACC Sports, and we're blogging and podcasting at allsportsdiscussion.com.
Matthew?
You can find me on Twitter I'm spending probably more time at our site Twitter account than I am at my personal account. I spend more time there at allsportsdacc, which is connected to allsportsdiscussion.com. Mm-hmm. My personal Twitter account, which I maybe hop on once every 3 months or so, ASD_Hokie Smash. One thing I want to add quickly, you were talking about UNC, just very quick.
Sure, of course.
They haven't been able to get that, as far as I'm concerned, they haven't been able to get that defense right in the Mac Brown era.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just this year, it's during his entire tenure there when he got these corners that all decided that they wanted to attend the University of Louisville after this year. We joke about which North Carolina defensive player did they take?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, Lou was like, thank you very much.
Yeah, no kidding. Thank you for inviting us on tonight, Scott.
And thank you for joining me, man. And for those out there, please check out them out on Twitter. Check out the great website; it's awesome, and the podcast as well. So check them out as well. And thank y'all for tuning in tonight. Again, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel because in any event, you'll be glad you did. And I'll be glad you did. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the week. Peace out.